From Montana's news leader, this is the MTN Noon News.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on the Noon News. I'm Victoria Hill in for Andrew Lutz. Coming up, just how dominant is Delta in Montana? We'll tell you, but first. In your leading look, the Senate could vote on the much-discussed $1 trillion infrastructure bill as soon as tomorrow. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says work still needs to be done to finalize amendments on the bill that would require at least 60 votes to pass. Meanwhile, the Congressional Budget Office released a report saying the bill would add $256 billion to the deficit over 10 years. That fact enraged Montana Senator Steve Daines, who says he'll be voting no on the massive proposal. Daines called that impact on the deficit absolutely unacceptable at a time when inflation is already increasing. Supporters of the bipartisan measure, including Montana Democrat John Tester, say the CBO score was unexpected and claim it doesn't consider all the revenue that's included by supporters. Governor Greg Gianforte is praising the Polson community for helping their neighbors displaced by the Boulder 2700 fire. The governor toured the area yesterday and got a first-hand look at the damage. More than a dozen homes have been destroyed in the fire, which is still growing. Nearly 500,000 acres have burned in Montana this year. And that is your Friday Leading Look.
It's the summertime equivalent of Groundhog's Day. We're midway through summer rather than midway through winter. The summer solstice and fall equinox. We're going to be looking at temperatures continuing to drop over the next few days. We're also losing about 2.5 minutes of daylight per day by the end of the month. That's going to turn into about 3 minutes. We're halfway through the growing season based on the last frost and the first frost of the fall season. And those temperatures have hit their peak and they're starting to drop a little bit. In fact, we're going to see that rather significantly as we start getting towards the end of the weekend. How long will that cool down last and what will it bring with it? Could be showers, thunderstorms, some severe weather, and some of it starts today. We'll have complete details with the forecast in just a few minutes from now.
Fire officials are concerned about the number of human-caused wildfires in northwest Montana.
We just can't afford to have more fires. The resources are stretched really, really thin.
Flathead County Fire Area Manager Lincoln Shute is reminding Flathead residents and tourists to strictly follow Stage 2 fire restrictions, including no campfires and open burning. Shute says Flathead firefighters have seen an uptick in human-caused fire starts the last 2 weeks.
And we just really need the public's help, that we just can't afford to have human-caused fires. We got our hands full trying to deal with what we have now and any new starts from lightning.
Shute says the little amount of rain northwest Montana has experienced this last week is deceiving, doing close to nothing to help Montana's current drought condition.
We're going to need a 3 or 4 day continuous rain event. We don't get that a lot in August. These little showers, they temper it, but for a short time only.
Even though a record number of tourists are visiting northwest Montana this summer, Shute says locals make up a large number of human-caused fire starts this season.
A lot of the fires we've been getting lately have been locals. They've been at private property. There have been a few leftover abandoned campfires up in the woods also. We're just trying to get the word out to everybody, and that across the board.
Shute says those who start a wildfire will be held financially responsible for any structure damages and fire suppression costs.
If you start a fire, you can be held not only for what is damaged, but the costs of fighting it too. And those big helicopters and bombers are rather expensive.
In Kalispell, Sean Wells, MTN News.
Everyone in the state is dealing with the wildfires or droughts in one way or another. But what do these current conditions mean for our big game animal population and the upcoming hunting season? The short answer is, it's complicated. That's because mild winters that result in the fire seasons like the one we're dealing with right now also mean higher winter survival rates for our deer, elk, moose, and pronghorn. Fires also lead to new growth and nutrition, which benefits our wildlife. But it's obviously not all positive.
Right now, with the dry summer, it makes it really difficult from a nutrition standpoint trying to get them get the food that they need, and so we start to see, especially with the young, their survival rates may drop off. They become more susceptible to predation. Their malnutrition really getting them ready for this upcoming winter makes it really harder for them to make through it.
And it turns out the biggest threat to wildlife isn't the danger of the fire itself, but what it causes.
We don't typically see a lot of direct mortality loss as a result of those fires. We certainly displace wildlife, and then they wind up competing with other wildlife that's already exists in other situations, other conditions.
And as Brian reminded me, even with the early fire season raging on right now, things aren't exactly doom and gloom for our wildlife or upcoming hunting season.
The adults typically cope. They figure out how to adjust. We may see some added mortality for some of the young, especially coming up if we have a difficult winter. But at the same time, this is not something new for wildlife. They do address those kinds of situations, and after the fires are over, a lot of times we have really good recovery, and it can be a real benefit to wildlife.
Brian added that as of right now, hunters shouldn't expect too many changes this upcoming fall. But wildlife populations always fluctuate, so it's important to double check those FWP regulations on the FWP website. To make it easy, we've got a link to that in this story on our website. Reporting from Helena, Andy Curtis, MTN News.
Montana leaders sequence COVID samples to determine what variant they come from at several locations, including here at the Public Health Laboratory in Helena. While they can't test every sample, the results they have seen make clear that Delta is becoming the most common variant in the state.
You know, it's the dominant strain around the U.S. now as well, so we were expecting that this might come.
The Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services released a new report this week. In the most recent results, 87% of samples tested were from the Delta variant. Public health leaders say it appears that variant is spread more easily than other COVID strains. Variants in general remain a concern for DPHHS. The report says of COVID-related hospitalizations and deaths in the last 8 weeks, all the cases that were sequenced came from variants. Leaders say that's another reason to encourage people to get vaccinated.
The risk of a genetic change happens every time a virus is transmitted from one person to another. So the more circulation we see, the more chances that there could be some mutation that could cause a new variant. So we really do want to try to limit our number of new cases and limit transmission so that we reduce the risk of any changes in this virus.
The numbers of new COVID cases and hospitalizations have been going up in the last few weeks. Leaders believe that may be the reason behind a recent increase in the number of people getting the vaccine. Last week, just over 4,500 Montanans got their first shot, up 18% from the week before. DPHHS says among people hospitalized for COVID-related illness in the last 8 weeks, almost 90% weren't vaccinated.
We feel that vaccination is our best tool against COVID.
The state lab is able to test 150 samples a week for variants, and the University of Montana and Montana State University can also do the sequencing. But not every sample contains enough genetic material to determine what variant it comes from. In Helena, Jonathan Amberian, MTN News.
Up next, Ed is in with another check of today's weather. Plus, while workers compete for the best paying jobs, employers are also in a competition of their own. We'll tell you why later in the show.